The night Evangeline Mae Thornton realized she would rather die than marry Silas Blackwood was the same night she met the cowboy who would change everything. It was late September in 1882, and the Arizona Territory stretched out beneath a sky so vast and star-scattered. It seemed to mock the suffocating walls of her father's ranch house. Evangeline stood at her bedroom window, her fingers pressed against the cool glass, watching the silhouettes of cattle drift across the moonlit pastures. In 3 days, she would become Mrs. Silas Blackwood, bound to a man 30 years her senior, a man whose eyes held all the warmth of a winter grave. Her father had made the arrangement 6 months ago, trading his only daughter for the promise of financial salvation. The Thornton Ranch was drowning in debt, and Silas Blackwood had money, land, and an appetite for young flesh that made Evangeline's stomach turn every time he looked at her. She was 22 years old, and her life was ending before it had truly begun. A sound from outside drew her attention. Hoofbeats, soft and deliberate, approaching from the west pasture. Evangeline leaned closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. A rider materialized from the darkness, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to the night. He dismounted near the stable, and even in the dim light, Evangeline could see the breadth of his shoulders, the way he moved with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. One of the ranch hands, she assumed, though she did not recognize his silhouette. She should have turned away, returned to her bed, tried to steal a few hours of sleep before another day of wedding preparations began. Instead, she found herself pulling a shawl around her nightgown and slipping from her room, moving through the darkened house with the practiced silence of someone who had spent a lifetime trying not to disturb her father's volatile temper. The night air was cool against her skin as she stepped onto the porch. The cowboy was still by the stable, tending to his horse with the kind of attention that suggested genuine care. Evangeline hesitated at the top of the steps, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this was, how reckless. But something pulled her forward, some desperate need to talk to another human being, someone who was not her father or Silas or the household staff who looked at her with pitying eyes. "You are out late," she called softly, her voice carrying across the yard. The cowboy turned, and even in the shadows, she saw him stiffen with surprise. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps only a few years older than herself. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture of respect that seemed entirely genuine. "Miss Thornton," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the still air. "I apologize if I disturbed you. I was riding fence line, checking for breaks. Your father wanted it done before the wedding." The word wedding hung between them like a curse. Evangeline descended the steps slowly, drawn by something she could not name. As she drew closer, she could make out more of his features. A strong jaw shadowed with stubble dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, eyes that caught the moonlight and reflected something warm and alive. "I do not think we have met," she said. "No, ma'am. I just hired on 2 weeks ago. Name is Jesse Callahan." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. "You should not be out here, Miss Thornton." "If your father knew—" "My father is passed out drunk in his study, as he is every night," Evangeline said, the bitterness in her voice surprising even herself. "And in 3 days it will not matter what he knows or does not know. I will belong to Silas Blackwood." She had not meant to say it, had not meant to reveal the despair that ate at her insides like acid. But something about this stranger, this cowboy with the gentle eyes, made the words spill out. Jesse Callahan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. "You do not want to marry him?" It was not a question. Evangeline laughed, a sound without humor. "What I want has never mattered. My father gambled away our future, and Silas Blackwood is willing to pay his debts in exchange for a wife young enough to be his granddaughter. That is the arrangement." "Arrangements can be broken," Jesse said quietly. Evangeline shook her head. "Not this one." Silas has already paid half the sum. The wedding will proceed or my father will lose everything. And he has made it very clear that if I do anything to jeopardize this marriage, he will make me regret it for whatever life I have left. The threat had been explicit. Her father, Marcus Thornton, was a man who had perfected the art of cruelty long before financial ruin had sharpened its edges. Evangeline bore the faded bruises to prove it, hidden beneath the long sleeves and high collars of her dresses. Jesse's jaw tightened. In the moonlight, she saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. A man who would sell his daughter deserves to lose everything. The fierce conviction in his voice startled her. Evangeline found herself studying this cowboy more closely, this stranger who seemed to care more about her fate than anyone else in her life. "You do not know me. Why should my situation matter to you?" "Because it is wrong," Jesse said simply. "And because I have seen what men like Silas Blackwood do to women like you. My mother was married to a man like that, sold to him by her own father. She died when I was 12, broken in body and spirit. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to stop it from happening to someone else, I would." The raw honesty in his words pierced through Evangeline's carefully constructed armor. For the first time in months, she felt tears burning behind her eyes. "There is nothing to be done. Even if I ran, where would I go? I have no money, no family except my father, no skills beyond embroidery and playing the piano. I would not survive a week on my own. You would not be on your own." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Evangeline stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "What are you saying?" Jesse stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "I am saying that if you want to escape this marriage, I will help you. I have money saved enough to get us both to California. I have family there, a cousin who runs a horse ranch outside Sacramento. He would give us both work, no questions asked." "Us," Evangeline whispered. "I will not leave you to face this alone," Jesse said. His voice was steady, certain. "If you want to run, we run together. I will see you safe, Miss Thornton. That is my promise." Evangeline felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. This was madness. She had known this man for all of 5 minutes, and he was offering to throw away his job, his security, to help her escape a fate that was not his concern. It made no logical sense. It was reckless and dangerous and could end with both of them dead if Silas or her father caught them. And yet, looking into Jesse Callahan's eyes, she saw something she had not seen in years: hope. "Why?" she asked again. "Why would you risk so much for someone you do not even know?" Jesse was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft. "Because the moment I saw you standing in that window, looking out at the night like a caged bird dreaming of flight, I knew I could not stand by and let them clip your wings. Call it madness, call it foolishness, but it is the truth." Evangeline felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked away for so long she had forgotten it existed. It was not love, not yet, but it was the first fragile seed of it, the recognition that this stranger saw her not as property or an obligation, but as a person worth saving. "When?" she whispered. "The wedding is in 3 days. Silas is arriving tomorrow evening with his family. After that, I will not be left alone for a moment." "Tomorrow night, then," Jesse said. "Before he arrives, I will have horses ready, supplies packed. We will leave before dawn, get as much distance as we can before anyone realizes you are gone. By the time they start searching, we will be across the border into New Mexico." It was insane, it was impossible, it was the only chance she had. "I will need to pack," Evangeline said, her mind already racing through the practicalities. "Just a small bag, things I can carry on horseback. And I will need to take my mother's jewelry. It is the only thing of value I have, the only thing my father has not already sold or gambled away." "Take whatever you need," Jesse said. "But pack light, we will be riding hard and every ounce matters." Evangeline nodded, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Tomorrow night, where should I meet you?" "The old line shack on the eastern boundary," Jesse said. Do you know it? Yes. It was a small, abandoned structure, used years ago when the ranch had been larger and more prosperous. No one went there anymore. Be there at 3 in the morning, Jessie said. No later, we need to be well away before sunrise. 3 in the morning. In less than 24 hours, her entire life would change. Evangeline felt dizzy with the enormity of it, the sheer audacity of what they were planning. If we are caught, we will not be caught, Jessie said, and there was such certainty in his voice that Evangeline almost believed him. Trust me, Miss Thornton. Evangeline, she said softly. If we are going to run away together, you should call me Evangeline. A slow smile curved Jessie's lips, transforming his face from handsome to devastating. Evangeline, he repeated, and the way he said her name like it was something precious made her breath catch. Tomorrow night, then, do not lose your nerve. I will not, she promised, though her hands were shaking. I will be there. She should have returned to the house then, should have gone back to her room before someone noticed her absence. But she lingered for another moment, studying the man who had just offered her salvation. Jessie, thank you. Whatever happens, thank you for giving me a choice. Everyone deserves a choice, Jessie said quietly. Now go before someone sees us together. Tomorrow night, Evangeline, I will be waiting. Evangeline turned and walked back to the house, her legs unsteady beneath her. When she reached her room, she closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. For the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt afraid, yes, terrified even, but beneath the fear was a bright, fierce hope. She was going to escape. She was going to be free. The next day passed in a blur of wedding preparations that now felt like a grotesque farce. Evangeline moved through the hours in a daze, nodding and smiling while her father barked orders at the household staff, and the cook prepared elaborate dishes for Silas's arrival. Every time her father looked at her, Evangeline was certain he could see straight through her, could read the plan written on her face. But Marcus Thornton saw only what he wanted to see, a daughter who had finally accepted her fate. You will make me proud tomorrow night, he said over dinner, his words slightly slurred from the whiskey he had been drinking since noon. Silas is a good match for you, a respectable man with money and position. You should be grateful. Evangeline looked down at her plate, at the food she could not bring herself to eat. Yes, father. He is a bit older, of course, but that just means he will know how to manage you properly, Marcus continued, oblivious to the way his words made Evangeline's skin crawl. A young husband would let you run wild, but Silas will keep you in line. You need that, with your mother's rebellious spirit in you. Her mother. Mary Thornton had died when Evangeline was 15, worn down by years of marriage to a man who saw her as little more than property. In her final days, delirious with fever, she had gripped Evangeline's hand and whispered, "Do not let him do to you what he did to me. Promise me. Run if you have to, but do not let him cage you." Evangeline had promised, though at the time she had not understood what her mother meant. Now, 7 years later, she understood perfectly. "I will do my duty, father," she said quietly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Marcus nodded, satisfied. "Good girl. Now, Silas will be here by 8. I want you in your best dress, hair done properly." First impressions matter, even though the deal is already sealed. Evangeline excused herself as soon as she could, retreating to her room under the pretense of preparing for Silas's arrival. Instead, she pulled out a small leather satchel from the back of her wardrobe and began to pack. 2 changes of clothes, sturdy and practical, not the fine dresses her father preferred. Her mother's jewelry, wrapped carefully in a handkerchief. A few photographs, the only images she had of her mother. A knife she had stolen from the kitchen months ago, hidden away for reasons she had not fully articulated even to herself. She packed quickly and efficiently, then hid the bag under her bed. At 7:30, she heard the sound of an approaching carriage. Silas Blackwood had arrived. Evangeline forced herself to go downstairs, to stand beside her father as Silas entered the house. He was exactly as she remembered, tall and thin, with iron-gray hair and a face like a hatchet blade. His eyes, pale and cold, swept over her with the assessing gaze of a man examining livestock. "Miss Thornton," he said, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. His touch made her skin crawl. "You look lovely. I am a fortunate man." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Evangeline managed, fighting the urge to snatch her hand away. "Silas, please," he said, still holding her hand. "We will be married tomorrow. Such formality is unnecessary between husband and wife, husband and wife." The words were a noose tightening around her neck. Evangeline smiled, the expression feeling like glass cutting into her face. Of course, dinner was an ordeal. Silas sat beside her, his leg pressed against hers beneath the table, his hand occasionally brushing her arm or shoulder in gestures that might have seemed affectionate to an outside observer, but felt like violations. He talked about his plans for her, how he would enjoy showing her off to his associates, how pleased he was to have secured such a young and beautiful bride. "You will give me sons," he said at one point, his hand settling on her knee beneath the table. "Strong sons to carry on the Blackwood name. That is a wife's primary duty, after all." Evangeline's stomach turned. She looked across the table and caught sight of her father, who was smiling with the satisfied expression of a man who had just closed a profitable business deal. Neither man saw her as a person. To them, she was a commodity, a means to an end. The evening dragged on interminably. When Silas finally departed for his hotel room in town, promising to return early the next morning for final preparations, Evangeline felt like she could breathe again. She retreated to her room, pleading exhaustion, and locked the door behind her. The house settled into silence as the hours crept by. Evangeline lay in bed fully clothed, her heart pounding, watching the shadows shift across her ceiling. At 2:30 in the morning, she rose, pulled on a sturdy riding jacket, and retrieved her bag from under the bed. She moved through the darkened house like a ghost, avoiding the creaky floorboards she had memorized over years of midnight wanderings. Outside, the night was cool and clear, the stars burning overhead with fierce brilliance. Evangeline walked quickly, keeping to the shadows, making her way toward the eastern boundary of the ranch. The line shack was nearly a mile from the main house, a trek that seemed to take forever in the darkness. Every sound made her jump, every rustle of wind through the grass sent her heart racing. But she pressed on, driven by desperation and the fragile hope that Jesse Callahan would be there, that this was not some cruel trick her mind had conjured. The line shack appeared out of the darkness, a ramshackle structure that leaned slightly to one side. And there, silhouetted against the starlight, was Jesse, standing beside two horses laden with supplies. "Evangeline," he said softly as she approached, and the relief in his voice mirrored her own feelings. "I was afraid you would not come." "I was afraid you would not be here," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. Jesse reached for her bag, securing it to one of the horses with practiced efficiency. "Everything is ready. We have food, water, blankets, everything we need to get to California. Are you sure about this?" "Once we leave, there is no going back." Evangeline thought of Silas's cold eyes, of her father's casual cruelty, of the life that awaited her if she stayed. "I am sure." Jesse nodded, then helped her mount one of the horses, a sturdy roan mare with kind eyes. He swung onto his own mount, a powerful bay gelding, and turned to look at her. "We ride hard until dawn, then rest during the heat of the day. Stay close to me, and if anything happens, do exactly as I say. Understood?" "Understood," Evangeline said, gathering the reins in hands that had stopped shaking. They set off into the night, leaving behind everything Evangeline had ever known. For the first few hours, she kept expecting to hear pursuit behind them, kept bracing for her father's angry shouts or the sound of gunfire. But there was only the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, the creak of leather, and the vast silence of the desert night. Dawn broke slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They had covered perhaps 15 miles, putting distance between themselves and the Thornton ranch. Jesse led them off the main trail, finding a sheltered spot among a cluster of rocks where they could rest unseen from the road. "We will sleep in shifts," he said, helping her dismount. "I will take first watch. You need to rest." Evangeline wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could stay awake, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She had not slept the night before, had barely eaten in days, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the escape was fading. Jesse spread out a blanket in the shade of the rocks, and she sank down onto it gratefully. "Jesse," she said as he settled a respectful distance away, his rifle across his knees. "What will happen when they discover I am gone?" "Your father will be furious," Jesse said honestly. "Sila's Blackwood will be humiliated. They will send men after us, almost certainly. But we have a head start, and I know this territory. We will stay off the main roads, travel at night when possible. By the time they figure out which direction we went, we will be too far ahead to catch. And if they do catch us," Jesse's jaw tightened, "they will not. I promise you, Evangeline, I will not let them take you back." There was something fierce in his voice, something protective that made Evangeline's chest tighten. She had known this man for barely 24 hours, and yet he was risking everything for her. "Why are you doing this? Tell me the truth. It cannot just be because of what happened to your mother." Jesse was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I told you about my mother, how she died broken by a man who saw her as property. What I did not tell you is that I tried to help her escape when I was 11 years old. I stole food and blankets, found an old horse no one was using. I begged her to run away with me, told her we could make it on our own, but she was too afraid, too beaten down. She refused, and 6 months later she was dead." He turned to look at Evangeline, and in his eyes she saw old pain, old guilt. "I have spent the last 14 years wishing I had tried harder, wondering if I could have saved her if I had just been braver or smarter or stronger. When I saw you at that window, when you told me about your situation, I knew I was being given a second chance. I could not save my mother, but maybe I could save you." Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes. She reached out, covering his hand with hers. "You have saved me, Jesse. Whatever happens now, you have already saved me. Do not carry that guilt anymore. Your mother made her choice just as I have made mine. The difference is that I had you to help me see that choice was possible." Jesse turned his hand over, his fingers threading through hers. The touch sent warmth spreading through Evangeline's body, a feeling that had nothing to do with the rising sun. "Sleep," he said gently. "We have a long journey ahead of us." Evangeline lay down on the blanket, suddenly aware of how intimate this situation was. She was alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, had run away with him in the middle of the night. By society's standards, she was ruined. But lying there under the endless Arizona sky, listening to Jesse's steady breathing, she felt more free than she ever had in her father's house. She slept, and for the first time in months did not dream of Sila's Blackwood's cold eyes. When she woke, the sun was high overhead and the heat was oppressive. Jesse was still awake, keeping watch, though she could see the exhaustion in the lines of his face. "You should have woken me," she said, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "You need to rest too." "I will rest soon," Jesse said. "I wanted to make sure we were not followed, but the road has been quiet. I think we are safe, at least for now." They ate a simple meal of dried meat and hardtack, washing it down with water from Jesse's canteen. As they ate, Jesse explained his plan in more detail. They would travel northwest, avoiding the main trails and towns where possible. It would take them nearly 3 weeks to reach California if all went well, longer if they encountered difficulties. 3 weeks, Evangeline repeated, trying to comprehend the enormity of what lay ahead. She had never been more than 10 miles from her father's ranch. The idea of traveling across hundreds of miles of wilderness was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Are you frightened?" Jesse asked. "Terrified," Evangeline admitted, "but also more alive than I have felt in years. Is that strange?" "No," Jesse said, a smile tugging at his lips. "It is not strange at all. They rested through the hottest part of the day, then set out again as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. They saw other travelers occasionally, but Jesse always managed to steer them away from potential encounters, keeping to the less traveled paths. On the third night, they made camp in a small canyon, sheltered from the wind. Jesse built a small fire, just large enough to warm some coffee and cook a simple dinner. As they ate, Evangeline found herself studying him in the firelight, taking in the strong lines of his face, the way his eyes reflected the flames. "Tell me about yourself," she said. "All I know is that you worked for my father and that your mother died when you were young." "Who are you, Jesse Callahan?" Jesse leaned back against a rock, cradling his tin cup of coffee. "Not much to tell, really. I was born in Texas, outside San Antonio. After my mother died, my father sent me to live with his brother, could not stand to look at me anymore. My uncle ran a horse ranch, taught me everything I know about ranching and riding. When I was 16, I struck out on my own, worked ranches all across Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. Been doing that ever since, never staying in one place too long." "Why not?" Evangeline asked. Jesse shrugged. "Restlessness, I suppose. Always felt like I was searching for something, though I could not have told you what. Every place I went, every ranch I worked, there was always this feeling that I was supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else." "And now," Evangeline asked softly, "do you still feel that way?" Jesse looked at her across the fire, his gaze intense. "No. For the first time in my life, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an electricity that made Evangeline's pulse quicken. She had felt it growing over the past few days, this awareness of him, this pull that seemed to draw her closer every time they spoke. It was more than gratitude, more than simple attraction. It was something deeper, more fundamental, as if some part of her recognized some part of him. "Jesse," she began, but he held up a hand, his body suddenly tense. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Evangeline froze, straining her ears. For a moment there was only silence. Then she heard it, the distant sound of horses, multiple riders moving through the night. Jesse was on his feet in an instant, dousing the fire with dirt. "We need to move. Now." They worked quickly and silently, gathering their supplies and saddling the horses. The sound of the approaching riders grew louder, closer. Jesse helped Evangeline mount, then swung onto his own horse. "Stay close," he said, and then they were moving, picking their way through the darkness with only the starlight to guide them. The pursuit was relentless. Whoever was behind them knew the territory and was not afraid to ride hard through the night. Jesse led them deeper into the canyon, following a narrow trail that climbed steadily upward. Behind them, Evangeline could hear shouting, the crack of gunfire echoing off the canyon walls. "They are shooting at us," she gasped, ducking low over her horse's neck. "They are shooting blind," Jesse called back. "Just trying to scare us. Keep moving." The trail grew steeper, more treacherous. Evangeline's horse stumbled, nearly sending her tumbling, but she held on, trusting the animal to find its footing. Jesse stayed ahead of her, his bay gelding sure-footed despite the darkness. They emerged from the canyon onto a high plateau, the land opening up around them. Jesse spurred his horse to a gallop, and Evangeline followed, her heart pounding in time with her horse's hoofbeats. They rode for what felt like hours, the pursuit still audible behind them but gradually fading. Finally, when the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn, Jesse slowed, then stopped. They were in the middle of a vast, empty plain with no shelter in sight. But when Evangeline looked back, she saw no sign of their pursuers. "Did we lose them?" she asked, breathing hard. "For now," Jesse said. His face was grim. "But they will not give up easily. Your father must have offered a substantial reward for your return, or Sila's did," Evangeline said. "His pride will not allow a runaway bride." Jesse looked at her, and in the growing light she could see the worry in his eyes. "We will need to be more careful." No more fires, no camping in the open, and we should consider changing our route, going farther north than I originally planned. Whatever it takes, Evangeline said. I am not going back, Jesse. I would rather die than go back. You are not going to die, Jesse said firmly. I will not let that happen. They rested only briefly before moving on, pushing their horses harder than Jesse liked but knowing they had no choice. The landscape grew more rugged as they traveled north, entering territory that Jesse admitted he did not know well. They survived on what they could hunt and forage, supplemented by their dwindling supplies. The days blurred together, an endless succession of riding and hiding and watching the horizon for signs of pursuit. Despite the constant danger, or perhaps because of it, Evangeline felt herself growing closer to Jesse. They talked as they rode, sharing stories and dreams and fears. She learned that he loved horses with a passion that bordered on reverence, that he had taught himself to read from an old Bible his mother had left him, that he had once wanted to be a veterinarian but had never had the money for schooling. He learned that she had wanted to be a teacher, that she loved Shakespeare and could recite entire passages from memory, that she had a gift for drawing but had been forbidden to pursue it because her father considered it frivolous. After we reach California, Jesse said one evening as they made camp in a grove of cottonwoods, after we are safe, you could study teaching or art, whatever you want. Whatever I want, Evangeline repeated wonderingly. I do not think I have ever had that option before. You do now, Jesse said. He was sitting beside her close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You are free, Evangeline, maybe not in the legal sense, not yet, but in every way that matters. Your life is your own. Evangeline turned to look at him, this man who had given up everything to help her escape a fate he could not bear to see her suffer. In the fading light, his face was all plains and shadows, beautiful in a rough, masculine way that made her breath catch. I am free because of you, she said softly. Jesse, I do not know how I will ever repay you for what you have done. You do not owe me anything, Jesse said. He reached up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair away from her face in a gesture that felt unbearably tender. Helping you, being with you these past days, it has been a gift. You have reminded me that there is still good in the world, still things worth fighting for. Jesse, Evangeline whispered, and then somehow the distance between them had disappeared. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Evangeline leaned into him, her hands coming up to frame his face, kissing him back with all the pent-up longing and gratitude and growing love she had been carrying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jesse rested his forehead against hers. Evangeline, I have to tell you something. These feelings I have for you, they are not just about wanting to help you or protect you. From that first moment I saw you, I felt something I have never felt before. I know this is probably not the right time, and I know I have no right to burden you with this when you are just escaping one unwanted marriage, but I need you to know. I am falling in love with you. Evangeline's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. You are not burdening me, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jesse, what I feel for you, it is like nothing I have ever experienced. With Silas, with the idea of marrying him, I felt nothing but dread and revulsion. But with you, I feel alive, I feel seen, I feel cherished. I do not know if it is love yet, but it is the beginning of something that could be. Something I want to be. Jesse kissed her again, deeper this time with a passion that ignited something fierce and bright inside Evangeline. She had never been kissed like this, had never wanted to be touched by anyone the way she wanted Jesse to touch her now. But even as her body responded to his, even as she felt heat pooling low in her belly, Jesse pulled back. We should not, he said, his voice rough. Not like this, not when you are still running from one forced marriage. When we are together, I want it to be because you have had time to think, to be sure. I will not take advantage of this situation. Evangeline wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she was sure, that this was what she wanted. But she also recognized the wisdom in his restraint. She was only just beginning to understand what it meant to have control over her own choices. Jesse was giving her space to discover that, even when it clearly cost him. "You are a good man, Jesse Callahan," she said, resting her head against his shoulder. "I am trying to be," he said, wrapping his arm around her. "For you, I want to be the best man I can be." They sat together as the stars came out, and for the first time since they had fled, Evangeline felt not just safe, but happy. The next week brought new challenges. They crossed into New Mexico territory, passing through high desert country that was both beautiful and unforgiving. Water was scarce, and they had to rely on Jesse's knowledge of where to find springs and seasonal streams. They saw signs of Apache presence, though they encountered no one. Jesse was respectful of the fact that they were traveling through land that belonged to others, and he made sure they left no trace of their passage. On the 10th day, they reached a small town called Silver Creek, little more than a collection of buildings clustered around a creek that gave the place its name. Jesse was reluctant to stop, but their supplies were dangerously low, and the horses needed proper rest and feed. "We will be careful," he said as they approached. "Stay close to me, do not talk to anyone, and we will get what we need and leave." The town was quiet, the few people on the street giving them only cursory glances. Jesse led them to the general store, where he purchased supplies while Evangeline waited outside with the horses. She was examining the saddle bags when a voice behind her made her freeze. "Well now, is that you, Jesse Callahan?" Evangeline turned to see a man approaching, middle-aged and weathered, with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. Jesse emerged from the store, and Evangeline saw his body stiffen with recognition. "Marshal Garrett," Jesse said, his voice carefully neutral. "Been a long time." "5 years, at least," the marshal said. His eyes moved from Jesse to Evangeline, assessing. "Who is your friend, my wife?" Jesse said without hesitation. "We are on our way to California." The marshal's eyebrows rose. "Your wife? Well, congratulations are in order, I suppose. Though I have to say, Callahan, she looks a bit young for you." "We are the same age," Evangeline said quickly, finding her voice. She stepped closer to Jesse, taking his arm in what she hoped was a wifely gesture. "Jesse saved for 2 years so we could make this trip. We are very excited to start our new life." The marshal studied them for a long moment, and Evangeline was certain he could see right through the lie. But then he nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Well, safe travels to you both. California is a long way off. Watch yourselves out there." "We will," Jesse said. "Thank you, Marshal." They left Silver Creek as quickly as they could without appearing to flee. Once they were well clear of the town, Jesse let out a long breath. "That was too close," he said. "If he had been looking for you, if there had been a wanted notice posted." "But there was not," Evangeline said. "We were lucky." "Luck runs out," Jesse said grimly. "We need to be more careful, no more towns unless absolutely necessary." They pushed on, entering the mountains of northern New Mexico. The terrain was challenging, the trails steep and rocky, but Jesse proved to be an expert guide. He found paths that Evangeline would never have noticed, led them through passes that seemed impossible. The higher they climbed, the colder it became, and Evangeline was grateful for the extra blankets Jesse had purchased in Silver Creek. One evening, as they made camp in a high meadow with a view that seemed to stretch forever, Evangeline asked, "How much farther to California?" "Another week, maybe 2, Jesse said. He was tending to the horses, checking their hooves and legs for any signs of injury. "We will drop down out of these mountains in a few days, cross into Arizona territory again, then head west through the desert. It will be hard traveling, but once we are through the worst of it, we will be close." "And then," Evangeline asked, "what happens when we reach your cousin's ranch?" Jesse finished with the horses and came to sit beside her. "Then we start over. We will find work, save money, build a life. If you still want to study teaching, we will find a way to make that happen. If you want to draw, I will buy you all the pencils and paper you need." "What about you?" Evangeline asked. "What do you want, Jesse?" Jesse looked at her, his expression serious. I want you to be happy. I want you to be safe, and I want someday when enough time has passed and you are ready for you to marry me. Not because you have to, not because it is an arrangement, but because you love me and want to build a life with me." Evangeline felt tears spring to her eyes. "I do love you," she said. "I know it has only been 2 weeks, and I know it is probably too soon to be sure, but I do. You have shown me what it means to be valued, to be respected. You have asked nothing of me except to let you help me. How could I not love you?" Jesse cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Evangeline Mae Thornton, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. Your courage, your strength, the way you have handled everything we have been through, it humbles me. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." "You already deserve me," Evangeline said. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." They kissed again under the vast mountain sky, and this time there was a promise in it, a commitment that went beyond words. They were building something together, something precious and rare, forged in adversity and strengthened by choice. That night, wrapped in Jesse's arms under the stars, Evangeline slept more peacefully than she ever had. The journey continued. They descended from the mountains, crossing back into Arizona territory and heading west across a landscape of red rock and endless sky. The heat was intense, and they traveled mostly at night now, resting during the day in whatever shade they could find. Their supplies held, barely, supplemented by jackrabbits Jesse shot and cooked over small, carefully hidden fires. On the 16th day, disaster struck. They were crossing a dry wash when Evangeline's horse stepped wrong, its leg buckling beneath it. The mare went down hard, and Evangeline barely managed to throw herself clear. Jesse was beside her in an instant, helping her up, checking her for injuries. "I am fine," she said, though her hip throbbed where she had hit the ground. "But the horse—" Jesse was already examining the mare. When he looked up, his face was grim. "Her leg is broken. There is nothing we can do for her." Evangeline felt tears spring to her eyes. The mare had carried her faithfully for hundreds of miles, had never complained or balked. "Can we not splint it, try to save her?" "She would not survive," Jesse said gently. "The kindest thing we can do is end her suffering quickly." He drew his pistol, and Evangeline turned away, covering her ears. The single shot echoed across the desert, and when she turned back, the mare was still. Jesse stood over her, his head bowed, then moved to strip the saddle and bags from the dead animal. "We will have to double up on my horse," he said. "It will slow us down, but we have no choice." They redistributed the weight, abandoning anything that was not absolutely essential. Jesse helped Evangeline mount behind him on the bay gelding, and they continued west, moving more slowly now with the added burden. The extra weight took its toll on Jesse's horse. By the 18th day, the gelding was visibly tired, its steps less sure. Jesse rationed the water carefully, giving most of it to the horse, but Evangeline knew it was not enough. "How much farther?" she asked, her lips cracked from the sun and wind. 2 days to the California border," Jesse said. 3 more to my cousin's ranch. We can make it, Evangeline. We have come too far to give up now." But that night, the horse went lame. They were camped in the shadow of a massive rock formation, and when Jesse went to check on the gelding in the morning, the animal could barely put weight on its right foreleg. "It is not broken," Jesse said, examining the leg carefully. "Just badly strained. He needs rest, several days at least." "We do not have several days," Evangeline said. She could see the despair in Jesse's eyes, the realization that they were so close but might not make it. "We walk," Jesse said finally. "We take what we can carry, leave the horse here with plenty of water and grass. Maybe by the time we reach my cousin's place, we can send someone back for him." They spent the morning preparing. Jesse fashioned packs they could carry on their backs, taking only the essentials: food, water, blankets, weapons. Everything else they left behind. It broke Evangeline's heart to leave the horse, but the animal was in no condition to travel, and they had no choice. Walking through the desert was brutal. The sun beat down mercilessly, the heat radiating off the sand and rock until Evangeline felt like she was being baked alive. Jessie set a steady pace, stopping every few hours to rest in whatever shade they could find. At night, they walked by starlight, covering as much distance as they could before the sun rose again. On the 20th day, they ran out of water. Jessie's canteen had developed a leak sometime during the night, and by morning it was empty. They still had Evangeline's smaller canteen, but it held less than a quart. "We need to find water today," Jessie said, his voice hoarse. "There should be a spring somewhere in this area, I just need to remember where." They searched through the heat of the day, Jessie leading them from one likely spot to another. But every potential water source was dry, the springs killed by years of drought. By evening, they had finished the last of their water, and Jessie's face was grave. "We will rest here tonight," he said, his speech slightly slurred from dehydration. "At first light, we push west as hard as we can. The border cannot be more than a day's walk away. Once we cross into California, there will be settlements, places we can find help." That night was the worst they had experienced. Evangeline's throat was so parched she could barely swallow, and her head pounded with every heartbeat. Jessie was in even worse shape, having given her the lion's share of their water over the past days. She curled against him, drawing comfort from his presence even as fear clawed at her insides. "Jessie," she whispered. "If we do not make it, we will make it," he said, his arm tightening around her. "I did not bring you all this way just to die in the desert. We will make it, Evangeline. I promise." She wanted to believe him. She had to believe him. But as the night wore on and Jessie's breathing became more labored, doubt began to creep in. They rose before dawn, both of them moving like ancient, brittle things. Jessie swayed on his feet, and Evangeline had to steady him. They set off westward, each step an act of will, each breath like inhaling fire. The sun rose, pitiless and blinding. Evangeline lost track of time, lost track of everything except the need to keep moving, to place one foot in front of the other. Beside her, Jessie stumbled, nearly fell, caught himself. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his eyes sunken in his skull. "Jessie, we need to rest," she said, though her own body was screaming for respite. "No," he rasped. "Keep moving, have to keep moving." They walked through the morning, through the worst heat of the day. Evangeline's vision swam, dark spots dancing at the edges. She was vaguely aware of Jessie stumbling again, going down to one knee. She tried to help him up, but her own strength was gone. "Leave me," Jessie said, the words barely audible. "Go on without me, you can make it." "No," Evangeline said fiercely, dropping to her knees beside him. "We stay together. If we die together." Jessie looked at her, his eyes focusing with difficulty. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I promised to keep you safe, and I failed." "You did not fail," Evangeline said, taking his face in her trembling hands. "You gave me freedom, Jessie. You gave me choice. You gave me love. That is more than I ever had before. If this is where our story ends, at least we had these weeks together." She kissed him, tasting salt and copper, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. When she pulled back, Jessie's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. "No," Evangeline said, shaking him. "No, Jessie, stay with me," but he did not respond. Evangeline felt panic rising, felt the world tilting sideways. She would not let him die. She could not. She struggled to her feet, trying to pull Jessie up, trying to get him moving. But her body would not obey, and she collapsed beside him, darkness closing in around her vision. This was it, she thought distantly. This was how it ended. But at least she was free, at least she had loved and been loved, at least voices. Someone was shouting. Evangeline tried to open her eyes, but the effort was too great. She felt hands on her, lifting her, and she wanted to fight, wanted to tell them to help Jessie first, but the darkness swallowed her whole. She woke to the sound of water. Not the imagined sound that had tormented her dreams in the desert, but real water, trickling and splashing nearby. Evangeline's eyes fluttered open, and she found herself staring at a wooden ceiling. She was lying on something soft, a real bed with sheets that smelled of lye soap and sunshine. "Easy now," a woman's voice said. You have been out for 2 days, do not try to sit up too fast. Evangeline turned her head and saw a woman sitting beside the bed, perhaps in her 40s, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. "Where am I?" Evangeline croaked, her voice a ruin. "The Callahan Ranch, just outside Sacramento," the woman said. "I am Margaret Callahan, Jesse's cousin by marriage. You and Jesse were found by some of our ranch hands not 10 miles from here. Another few hours and you both would have been dead, Jesse." "Is he alive?" Evangeline asked urgently, trying to sit up despite the woman's warning. "He is alive," Margaret assured her, gently pressing her back down. "In rough shape, same as you, but he will recover. He has been asking for you every time he is lucid enough to speak. Keep saying your name, making us promise you are safe." Relief washed over Evangeline so powerfully that she felt tears streaming down her face. "I need to see him." "And you will," Margaret said. "But first, you need to drink some water slowly and eat some broth. Then, if you can manage it, we will take you to him." Over the next hour, Margaret helped Evangeline sit up and take small sips of water, then spoonfuls of rich beef broth that tasted like the finest meal Evangeline had ever eaten. Margaret explained that the ranch hands had been out looking for strays when they spotted 2 figures collapsed in the desert. They had brought Jesse and Evangeline back to the ranch, where Margaret and her husband Robert had been nursing them for 2 days. "Jesse told us some of your story," Margaret said carefully. "Not all of it, but enough. Said you were running from a forced marriage, that you needed sanctuary. You are safe here, Evangeline. No one will force you to do anything you do not want to do." "Thank you," Evangeline whispered. "I do not know how to repay your kindness." "You do not need to repay anything," Margaret said. "Jesse is family, which makes you family. Now, do you think you can walk? He really has been beside himself worrying about you." With Margaret's help, Evangeline managed to stand, though her legs felt like water. They made their way slowly down a hallway to another room where Jesse lay in a bed similar to hers. His eyes were closed, his face gaunt and still bearing the ravages of their ordeal. But his chest rose and fell steadily, and when Evangeline whispered his name, his eyes opened. "Evangeline," he breathed, and the relief in his voice mirrored what she had felt. "You are alive. You are safe." "Thanks to you," she said, sinking into the chair beside his bed and taking his hand. "You got us here, Jesse. We made it." "We made it," he repeated, and a smile tugged at his cracked lips. "I was so afraid when I woke up and you were not there, thought I had failed you." "You could never fail me," Evangeline said, bringing his hand to her lips. "You are the bravest, most selfless man I have ever known. I love you, Jesse Callahan. I love you with everything I am." "I love you too," Jesse said. "And as soon as I can stand without falling over, I am going to ask you properly to marry me, with a ring and everything." Evangeline laughed, though the sound was choked with tears. "I will say yes, just so you know." "Good," Jesse said, his eyes drifting closed again. "That is good." Margaret ushered Evangeline back to her own room, insisting she needed more rest. Over the next week, both she and Jesse recovered slowly. The Callahans proved to be gracious hosts, asking no questions and offering nothing but kindness. Robert Callahan was a tall, rangy man with Jesse's same easy manner around horses. He and his wife had built their ranch from nothing, and it showed in the pride they took in their land and animals. As Evangeline regained her strength, she began to help around the ranch house, insisting on earning her keep. Margaret taught her to cook properly, not the fine dishes her father's cook had prepared, but hearty, practical meals that fed ranch hands and family alike. Evangeline discovered she had a talent for it, and for the first time in her life she felt useful in a way that mattered. Jesse recovered more slowly, the dehydration having taken a harder toll on his system. But within 2 weeks, he was up and moving, and within 3, he was back to working with the horses, though Robert made him take it easy. Evangeline would watch from the porch as Jesse worked in the corral, gentling a skittish mare or training a young gelding, and her heart would swell with love and pride. One evening, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Jesse found her sitting on the porch and held out his hand. "Walk with me." They strolled away from the house, following a path that led to a small rise overlooking the ranch. From there, they could see the mountains in the distance, the fields where cattle grazed, the neat buildings of the ranch spread out below. It was beautiful and peaceful, and Evangeline felt something inside her finally settle. "I spoke with Robert today," Jesse said. "He has offered me a permanent position here, managing the horse breeding program. It is good work, steady pay, and a small house on the property that comes with the job. It is not much, but it could be a start for us if you want it." "If I want it," Evangeline repeated. "Jesse, it sounds perfect." Jesse reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. When he opened his hand, Evangeline saw a ring, simple silver set with a small turquoise stone. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing of hers I have left. I know it is not much, not compared to what you might have had. It is perfect," Evangeline interrupted, fresh tears springing to her eyes. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Jesse took her hand, and there, with the sun setting behind them and the whole world spread out at their feet, he knelt. "Evangeline Mae Thornton, you are the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I have ever known. You have made me believe in second chances, in the possibility of happiness. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here, not because you have to, but because you choose to?" "Yes," Evangeline said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Jesse, I will marry you. I choose you every day for the rest of my life." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion and tenderness that made her feel cherished beyond measure. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Sacramento. Margaret stood up with Evangeline and Robert with Jesse. There were no elaborate decorations, no fancy dresses or large crowds. But as Evangeline stood beside Jesse and spoke her vows, promising to love and honor him all her days, she felt more joy than she had ever thought possible. The small house Jesse had mentioned turned out to be a charming two-room cabin on the edge of the ranch property, with a covered porch and a view of the mountains. It needed work, and they spent the first months of their marriage fixing it up, painting and repairing and making it truly theirs. Evangeline planted a garden, flowers and vegetables both, and discovered she loved the feel of her hands in the soil, loved watching things grow under her care. Jesse thrived in his new position. He had a gift for understanding horses, for knowing what each animal needed. Under his management, the Callahan Ranch's breeding program grew, their horses gaining a reputation throughout California for quality and temperament. He worked long days, but he always came home to Evangeline, always made time to sit with her on the porch in the evenings and talk about their days, their dreams, their future. 6 months after their wedding, Evangeline realized she was pregnant. She told Jesse over dinner one evening, and the look of wonder and joy on his face made her fall in love with him all over again. "A baby," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Evangeline asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Jesse said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Evangeline, a home, a purpose, and now a family. I am the luckiest man alive." Their son was born in the spring of 1883, on a morning when the wildflowers covered the hills in carpets of gold and purple. He was healthy and strong, with Jesse's dark hair and Evangeline's green eyes. They named him William, after Jesse's uncle who had taken him in as a boy. And from the moment Evangeline held him in her arms, she knew that every hardship, every moment of fear and pain had been worth it to reach this point. Jesse was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son. Evangeline would often find them together, Jesse talking to the baby in a low, soothing voice as he showed him the horses or walked him around the ranch. It filled her heart to overflowing, this life they had built together. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Catherine, named for Jesse's mother. She was smaller than William had been, more delicate, but with a will of iron that showed itself from the start. Evangeline loved watching Jesse with his daughter, seeing the gentle care he took with her, the way he treated her as precious beyond measure. The years passed, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life. William grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about horses and cattle and the land. Catherine proved to have her mother's artistic talent, filling pages with drawings of everything she saw. Evangeline taught both children to read and write, using the education her father had provided for very different purposes than he had intended. One evening, when William was 8 and Catherine was 6, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset. The children were playing with a litter of puppies, their laughter carrying on the warm air. Jesse sat beside Evangeline, his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever think about what might have happened?" she asked quietly. "If we had not run that night, if you had not helped me escape." "Every day," Jesse said. "And every day I thank God that I was brave enough to offer and that you were brave enough to accept, because this, right here, is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me a home, Evangeline, not just a place but a feeling. You made me whole. You made me free," Evangeline said, "and then you made me happy. I could not ask for anything more." "How about one more thing?" Jesse said, a smile tugging at his lips. "What?" Evangeline asked. "Another baby," Jesse said. "I know we said 2 was enough, but I think this house could use a little more noise and chaos." Evangeline laughed, turning to kiss him. "I think that could be arranged." Their third child, a son they named Marcus, after no one in particular, but because they both liked the name, was born the following spring. He was the most easygoing of the 3, content to sit and watch the world around him with wise, thoughtful eyes. As the children grew, Evangeline began teaching other children in the area, holding classes in their home 2 days a week. It was not the formal teaching position she had once dreamed of, but it brought her immense satisfaction. Jesse continued to excel with the horses, and eventually, he and Robert became partners in the breeding program, splitting the profits equally. They prospered, not in the way Silas Blackwood had been wealthy, but in ways that mattered more. They had enough to eat, clothes on their backs, a solid roof over their heads, and most importantly, they had each other. News of her father and Silas Blackwood reached Evangeline occasionally through letters from old acquaintances. Her father had died 5 years after her escape, his liver finally giving out from decades of alcohol abuse. Silas had eventually married another young woman, and rumor had it she was as miserable as Evangeline would have been. Evangeline felt a pang of sadness for the woman, but mostly she felt grateful that it was not her. She had no regrets about the choice she had made that night when she met Jesse by the stable. The journey had been hard, had nearly killed them both, but it had also forged them into the people they became. Every scar, every difficult moment had been a step toward this life they had built. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jesse surprised her with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Margaret and Robert and took the train to the city, staying in a modest hotel and exploring the bustling streets together. On their last evening, they walked along the waterfront, watching the ships in the harbor and the sun setting over the ocean. "I love you," Jesse said, pulling her close. "I have loved you since that first night when you came to me like a ghost in the darkness. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Evangeline said. "You gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You gave me the freedom to choose my own life, and I chose you. Every day, in every way, I choose you." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Evangeline felt the same thrill she had felt on that first night, the same sense of rightness, of coming home. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows in equal measure. William grew into a fine young man who chose to stay on the ranch, working alongside his father. Catherine went to San Francisco to study art, returning 2 years later with a husband who was a photographer. and together they opened a studio in Sacramento. Marcus, ever the wanderer, traveled east to study veterinary medicine, fulfilling the dream his father had once had. Jesse's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines appeared around his eyes, but to Evangeline, he was as handsome as he had been that night by the stable. Her own beauty had matured, but Jesse still looked at her as if she was the most precious thing in the world. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family growing and spreading like the branches of a strong tree. The cabin they had started in was expanded multiple times, growing to accommodate visiting children and grandchildren. The walls were covered with Catherine's artwork and photographs, with the children's drawings and report cards, with all the accumulated treasures of a life well lived. On a warm evening in the summer of 1925, when Evangeline was 65 and Jesse was 68, they sat together on the porch they had sat on countless times before. Their bodies were older now, marked by decades of hard work and the inevitable passage of time, but their love was as strong as ever, burnished bright by years of choosing each other every single day. "You remember the night we met?" Evangeline asked, her hand clasped in Jesse's. "Every detail," Jesse said. "You were standing at your window, looking like you wanted to fly away, and I thought, there is a woman who deserves better than what life has given her." "You gave me better," Evangeline said. "You gave me everything. We gave each other everything," Jesse corrected. "That is what partnership is, what love is." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Around them, the ranch hummed with life, the sounds of horses in the pasture, cattle lowing in the distance, the voices of their grandchildren playing in the yard. "No regrets?" Jesse asked softly. "Not a single one," Evangeline said. "You?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner," Jesse said, raising her hand to his lips. "But I suppose we met exactly when we were meant to. Everything that came before led us to that moment." "To that choice," Evangeline added, "the choice to be brave, the choice to trust, the choice to love." "The choice to be free," Jesse said. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Evangeline leaned her head on Jesse's shoulder, feeling the deep contentment that came from a life lived fully and well. She had been trapped once, sold like property, her future stolen from her. But a cowboy had helped her escape before the dawn, and in doing so had given her the most precious gift of all, the freedom to choose her own destiny, and she had chosen love. She had chosen Jesse. She had chosen this life with all its hardships and joys, its sorrows and triumphs. And she would choose it again, 1,000 times over, because it was hers in a way nothing had ever been before. The night deepened around them, but they stayed on the porch, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life together in the light. Behind them, the house they had made into a home glowed with warm lamplight. Before them, the future stretched out, filled with children and grandchildren who would carry their story forward, who would remember that love was always worth fighting for, that freedom was a gift to be cherished, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose your own path, even when the world tried to tell you that path was not yours to take. Their story had begun with a desperate escape in the wild night, two people fleeing toward an uncertain future. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a testament to the power of choice, to the strength found in partnership, to the enduring nature of love that was freely given and gratefully received. As they finally rose to go inside, Jesse paused to look back at the land spread out before them, at the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. "We did well, did we not?" he said. "We did better than well," Evangeline said, taking his hand. "We did everything that mattered." And hand in hand, they walked into the house together, into the warmth and light of the life they had chosen, the life they had built, the life that was entirely and beautifully their own. The door closed softly behind them, and the ranch settled into peaceful night, its heart still beating strong with the love story that had begun more than 4 decades ago, when a trapped woman and a compassionate cowboy decided that freedom was worth any risk, that love was worth any sacrifice, and that together, they could overcome anything the world threw at them. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that thrived under their careful stewardship, in the community they had helped build through decades of hard work and generosity. But most of all, it lived on in the simple truth that they had loved each other well, had chosen each other every day, and had turned a desperate midnight escape into a lifetime of happiness, purpose, and profound, abiding love.